You're listening to the Fezcast, the Saracens fans podcast, bringing you the independent and unhinged views of the voices in our heads, as well as those of our special guests. To get in touch with us, find the Fezcast on social media and listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube and more. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy this week's show.
You're listening to the Fezcast.
Well, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, whenever time you are listening to us here on the Fezcast. But it's our next episode. I've already lost count, Duncan. What's this? Number 3, isn't it?
It's number 3, yeah.
Number 3, there you go. See, I've had to take my shoes and socks off to work that one out, but there we go. But yeah, joining me tonight is Alex, John and Duncan to discuss, well, remarkably, we're going to manage to discuss most of the rugby of the weekend with none of us actually having seen any of it.
Not a peep.
Brief YouTube clips and speaking to other people. So it's going to be very sort of like second-hand Chinese whispers and everything, but I think we should cover it. But before we go into that, I just wanted to revisit last week's show, and in particular, the brilliant, well, I say myself, brilliant interview, but I was really proud of the interview I did with Charlie Hodgson, made by Charlie Hodgson, who is someone that we've really been trying to get hold of for quite some time. And I know, thanks to Loxy for basically badgering Charlie's wife, Daisy, into getting him to come on. But now he's found himself in a place where he feels confident about coming on. And I thought, John, I'll come to you first. I thought he did a really good interview, as we often find. Honest, raw, laid everything out there. The troubles he's had in the last few years in adjusting to life outside rugby and everything that goes around with it. I thoroughly enjoyed doing it. I hope everybody thoroughly enjoyed listening to it.
What was nice, it was his honesty.
Yeah.
Not listening to a friend. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And people I've spoken to said, you managed to pin him down for that long. I said, well, I didn't, but Jess certainly did.
Yeah, no, it was wonderful chatting to him, Alex. And, you know, as I say, talking about not only his career, but what he did afterwards, but also his son coming through the ranks now and making his age grade debut. And, you know, the pride around that, but also the issues around how family get involved and, you know, Daisy, Henry's mum, Charlie's wife, you know, seeing, I have to go through all of that with Charlie and all the highs and lows and everything that goes around with that. And then, you know, she's going to potentially have that to look forward to in the future as well, isn't she, Alex?
Yeah, and I think you don't often get that perspective of players once they're retired and then their kind of kids are coming through. You see them kind of having duties when they're playing and maybe kind of straight after you're retired, but it's interesting to get that kind of other perspective of when they're kind of going through it again with their own children.
And I mean, it's something that you've discussed with other people. I remember, you know, when you talked to David Stratton in particular, was one that springs out, and Joel Tompkins as well, is what do you do after rugby? And I know when I spoke to Chris Chesney, I mentioned it, you know, Chris said there's only a finite number of jobs remaining in rugby, you know, and those get snapped up. If you're not becoming a coach or moving into the media, what do you do? And I mean, for Charlie, it seems that he spent 8 years, as he said, going from job to job, project to project, and not finding that thing to replace rugby. And it's obviously very difficult.
David Strattle, funnily enough, I think is very happy in his own skin, and he's one of those types of people. But Marcello Bosch, if you remember,
yeah,
terrible problems. Saracens traditionally have always done a lot for players in terms of preparing them for life after the game, and gave Charlie Hodgson, which on the surface would appear to have been, you know, the ideal job for someone coming out of rugby, but he didn't like it because he wasn't in what must be a tremendously sweet spot of going into work, doing something you love every day, being with a whole bunch of mates who are really good fun. And in a way, they have this curse of having a wonderful life too early and then having to fill it with something afterwards. And I've heard lots of stories of Premier League footballers, for instance, who've lost all the money that they've earned through gambling, because how do they replace that adrenaline rush and the great environment they live in? Great to hear that it appears to be through coaching that Charlie is finding some happiness. He certainly has tried a lot and nothing's worked for him. And let's hope that the current plan does.
I mean, it's an interesting point you make there, in particular in relation to Premiership footballers who obviously, their financial rewards while they're playing a game are far huger than anything rugby players earn. But potentially, as a rugby player, you could be earning money that's really good money, that's better than perhaps you would earn in other roles outside of rugby, but it stops when you're 35 years old. And, we'll all work until we're 65, 70 and have pensions that we paid in for all that period of time. And we're kind of like insulated during that period of time. And we retire when we're 70. We've got less time in which to spend that money almost. But if you retire at 35 and you can't find something that's going to give you that remuneration you need in comparison to the lifestyle you've led up until then, and then that's something that's got to fulfill you. That's a long, long time to worry about, isn't it, Duncan?
With Premier League footballers, if they're going to be good enough to eventually be a Premier League footballer, they're probably on about 60 grand a year when they're 15.
Yeah.
So they have, they have no concepts of money. Different for rugby players. And in a way, if they've got enough to be comfortable, enough in the pension pot and what have you, hopefully they're sensible enough to hang on to it. And we're not going to be in financial difficulties, although I think in very recent years in England, that is much harder for rugby players to do. But no, it's the hours in the day. It's the sense of purpose. It's how do you replace doing something that you really loved and you can't do it anymore?
Yeah, well, we've seen that this week with an interview with former Saracens player, legend, Liam Williams, who has been let go by Cardiff over the summer, 34 years old. He still believes he's got something to offer. He came back to Saracens last season, then got injured, and it was like Max Malins is coming back, whatever, in his position. So he was seeing a surplus requirements here, and then he's gone to Cardiff. I think if you've got players that have come through the Saracens way since they were 12, 13, 14 years old, and the way that the club looks after them through those period of time, and we'll take the web roles and the legalities of what they did with those players. But if you're Jamie George, if you're, George Cruz is a prime example, retired at 32 years old, he's got his own business that he's running now. Brad Barrett got his business that he set up whilst he was at Saracens. Alistair Hargreaves, Chris Wiles setting up Wolfpack Lagers and everything like that. If you've come through that whole culture and that whole family, you seem set up for it. Whereas if you're a player perhaps that has come into the club situation a bit later on in your career, you're one of the stars that have been signed in, it seems to be a little bit more difficult for those players to get that support, John. I don't know if that's a fair criticism.
I think it is. And I think we also have to consider that maybe the support that the clubs would have given in the past, maybe they're a bit more wary about giving that level of support now. So we've mentioned about Brad Barrett, we've mentioned Wolfpack and so on and so forth, George Cruz. And maybe the clubs are a bit wary about saying, well, I would have done this in the past, but can I do that now? Or am I doing it outside the rules? So ultimately, that's going to have a kind of knock-on effect of what the players do once they finish, isn't it?
Well, it is. And obviously, the big thing there, Duncan, is the fact that Nigel Ray has taken those steps away from the club. He was very much a driver of that kind of family culture and everything. And, for whatever reason, he's taken a step back. So things are being done on perhaps a more hard-headed commercial basis, as they have to be done because of the fact that there isn't the money in the game, Duncan.
Yeah, I mean, there's no point dragging up all the stuff that we got into trouble for. But what we did before that, we mentioned Wolfpack, Tiki Tonga, etc., was superb. And, if it is the case now that being whiter than white and not having Nigel Ray to drive that is not happening, that's a shame. Having said that, not everybody can be an entrepreneur. There'll be many players who will want to be employees within an existing structure, etc. And Matt in particular is pretty certain that a lot of that support still goes on and trying to find people post-playing careers. And I very much hope it is. There's a very good edition of Lessons from the Game podcast, which had Brad Barrett on this week and touched on this subject.
The other big fundamental shift came, I think, Brendan Fenter, when he first took over. He came with this sort of analogy that we only want 17% of your time. And we're sort of trying hard to sort of work what that meant. he said, the reality of professional sport, there's a lot of recovery. You're going to be at the training center, for 4 or 5 hours a day. We're going to give you 3 days off a week. But when you're here, you're going to apply everything you can and give me 100%. In turn, we'll trust you, treat you like adults. We want you to pursue opportunities outside of sport, whether it be in tertiary education, business, family life. We want you to really immerse yourself in London. And I think what you got was players then started to sort of identify with the club that I'm no longer just a rugby player. I'm actually Brad. I'm a person. I'm a father. I'm a person who's excited about the future after rugby. And you had this sort of deep belief that the club really cared about you as an individual.
Now, talking about players post-career, Alex and I, last Tuesday night, we went down to the StoneX for a brilliant event, SSA event, where Alex Good was interviewed by Simon Greenhill, took questions from the floor, but was around having photographs taken, everything, just to celebrate a club legend. I would say our greatest player, in so much as the fact that 402 games, and the love for Alex on the night, Alex, was phenomenal, wasn't it? The calls of Goody as he stepped up to the stage were absolutely spine-tingling, weren't they?
Yeah, it was great. It was a good night. I had a lot of fun. And it was nice to kind of get his perspective as he moved into coaching and kind of where he thinks the club will go, as well as looking back on his career.
I mean, it was very funny. I mean, if the rugby coaching doesn't come off, he's got a career in media without a shadow of a doubt. And I would love to see him in the media, if not for no other reason that the media in this country seems to be a bit too Leicester Tigers heavy for my liking. We could do with, a counterpoint to all the Quins, Wasps and Tigers players in the media. And I think Goody would be an exceptionally good person in that role, wouldn't he, Alex?
Yeah, I think he would.
So well done to the SSA for organising that, and Alison Pearson for her involvement in that. I thought that was an absolutely great night, and I look forward to further nights that the SSA are going to put on. Shall we have a quick break there, and then we'll come back and we'll try and wing it. Saracens away at Tigers.
Hey, it's Charlie Hodgson, and you are listening to the Fezcasts.
This is the Fezcast.
Well, welcome back to part 2 of our third episode of season 6 of the Fezcast with myself, Jez, joined by Duncan, Alex, and John to discuss a game I don't think any of us have seen other than some brief YouTube highlights and also the comments that we've seen online. And I know, John, you had a conversation with Darren Stevens, didn't you, afterwards? So let's see what we could cover here on the game. I mean, it's a shame that we can't get to see too much of these games, but I suppose there's so much rugby going on, particularly like with the Women's World Cup and everything, that something has to give, doesn't it, John?
We can't be all the places at once, and we're not going to get all of the games up on TV, especially when there's a Women's World Cup going on. But I think these Premier Cup games, I mean, they're a good blooding ground for our academy players, and it's a good opportunity for them to play up against some good players. And Leicester put out some good players last weekend.
They did indeed, didn't they? I think we went into it, Duncan, with an idea of blooding youngsters. And Tigers went a little bit more experience heavy. I'm not going to say that they were entirely that'll be the first team you'll see in the Premiership, but there were enough quality players on the field that you would expect to see during the main season, wasn't there, from Tigers?
There were. I mean, I have mixed feelings about it because these matches are part of our season ticket. They are going to be a large part of the season when the internationals are on. And you could look at it on one hand, the competition is completely devalued because it's being treated as a pre-season game in effect. And I suspect for next week's games, you will see even more first-team players in there. So as a competition, it becomes a bit of a lottery as to who's playing what, as opposed to being what I think it was meant to be, which was a development competition. It was meant to be for the second 15s, and it's not being treated as that. But having said that, John's point is totally valid. It's good for these young players to get tested against very, very senior players, and it will do them a lot of good. Looking at the comments, it looked like we were all over them in the first half, but apart from one try, just couldn't put our chances away, which seemed to be a curse in the whole game. The scrum was very good. The line out apparently was not very good at all, which is a problem we maybe seen before. So clearly there's a lot of stuff to work on.
And you got to bear in mind that this is really the first proper competitive game these guys have played. Coming after a flight back from South Africa, which will take something energy out of teams and everything like that. But I do think 2 points to pick up from what you said there, Duncan. Number one, yes, you're absolutely right. These useful experiences to young players, but likelihood is, having seen that, the players that are going to be going away into training squads for England that potentially will be part of the autumn internationals, players like Nathan Mikolo, who have been bubbling there or thereabouts around the team, Charlie Bracken, Jack Bracken, these younger guys, potentially during those autumn internationals are going to get some game time in pretty tough competitions, aren't they? So I actually look at it, which is my second point, and say a result like that, 20 points to 7, that if there'd been a bit of greater accuracy in the first half in particular, when tries and points went begging, when perhaps they shouldn't have done, but, rusty first proper game of the season, as it were, a loss of only 13 points against a pretty good Leicester team isn't such a bad result, is it, Duncan? Really, if you look at it, if you just look at the result as opposed to the scores or whatever, I think actually they showed an awful lot of ambition, which is something that we criticised last year in attack. Okay, it didn't come off, but they're stepping in the right direction.
Looking at the highlights, they quite properly, from what we've heard, cut out a lot of our line-outs. They really should have cut out the conversion, shouldn't they? Because with 13-point loss, looks like it should have been 21.
Yeah, then take the 5 points off for the third try, where the prop clearly dropped the ball, and the referee saying it went backwards. He dropped the ball, didn't he, Alex?
Yeah, I think he did, but oh well.
Important one though, Alex. Great to see Max Malin's back in the shirt that he should always been wearing at fullback for Saracens, and by all accounts, I mean, he did all right. Limited chances in the back three, but what he did with the ball, from what I can see on social media and everything, he did pretty well.
It's always good to see players coming back and kind of getting in positions they maybe wanted to play or people thought they would deserve to play. But I think he did well. I think it's difficult conditions, but he did well with the ball he had, I think.
John, I'm going to ask you about another player who's been mentioned in dispatches over social media and everything, and I'm sure Darren would have perhaps highlighted him to you, but young lad in the forward, Siddiqui, had a great game apparently.
From what I saw and what I heard, yes, he did. I mean, it was a really good experience because they were pinned back on our line in quarter 3 and quarter 4. From what I've read and I've seen, he had a very good game. A really good experience for him, though.
He's not little, is he?
He's not little.
he's
not little.
He's a big boy, and also, I mean, he's one of these players as well. As the game goes a bit more hybrid in positions, he's a lock who can play blindside, or is he a blindside who can play lock? We'll probably work that out as he matures a bit, because I mean he's still only 13 or something stupid like that, isn't he? So he's going to perhaps fill out even more and perhaps develop. Is he a loose forward? Is he a tight forward or whatever? But the usefulness of having that ability to play a number of positions, particularly as squads get condensed, as we know, we talked about a lot of times, that's a hugely important aspect to your game that you can have, isn't it, Duncan?
It is. It looks like Jack Bracken had another really good game, and you mentioned Malin's playing at 15. We just got millions of back three players, and I think it was interesting to see Brandon Jackson came on as sub for Nick Tompkins, so he's obviously going back to his original position of centre, because there's no way he's ever going to get a game out wide. We seem to be blessed in that area.
Indeed. Now, the one player who's come in for I'll not say criticism, but I had a question over some of the things he did, was that Charlie Bracken didn't seem to get hold of his box kicking at all on Saturday. He was kicking a bit too long and out on a foot a couple of times. Presumably, as you said, Alex, the weather conditions weren't perhaps conducive. And hopefully, it will give him a good lesson in how to play in conditions that aren't necessarily perfect for playing, which you'll get a lot of the StoneX during winter.
Yeah, I think especially with the StoneX, it's quite exposed with the corners being open. I think that's something he's going to have to work on, because if that's how Saracens want to play, then we need to be on top of that. But I think, he didn't have a great game at the weekend, and it would definitely be something he'll look at working on in the future.
Now, obviously, the next game up is Saints at home in the same competition on Friday night. I'm hoping that I'm going to be down for the captain's run on Thursday, just waiting for Ollie to confirm everything. And hopefully we'll have some good interviews lined up for that day and everything. But Saints at home, it's a bit of it's a game that we always look forward to, isn't it? You know, I suppose at present, other than Quins, our closest friends, shall we say, or foes, whichever way you want to look at it. And especially given the way that we ended our season last season against Saints, which a game that you and me went to, Duncan, that was particularly depressing eventually, although it was quite good fun to start with. Yeah, I mean, how do you see this? What do you see happening here? You said, Duncan, as well, you expect a few more perhaps senior players to come back into this game as we get ready for the Falcons game in the league. Sorry, Falcons, Red Bulls now, aren't they? In the league the following week.
Very interesting opener for us in the league, isn't it? But yes, next week is only a week away from our first proper game, if you like. And be amazed if there wasn't a lot of our first team getting a run out. Just you reminded me of that game at Saints, and I think we need to organise. I don't think they've got a podcast of these Saints, but we should organise for them to stand in front of our wheelchair-bound supporters who'll give them stick.
Yeah, I'll go and get myself a wheelchair so I can be part of it.
Get our own back. The first time
at least on a set of crutches or something.
The first time I've ever been verbally abused by a wheelchair-bound crowd. It was different.
It was indeed, yeah. Well, they obviously saw you as a soft target.
So why were they picking on you then?
Yeah. Oh, they obviously like to challenge as well. But there we go. Well, I think we've done pretty well there to cover that, considering we've seen like 5 minutes of edited highlights, which included at least a minute of watching the Leicester Tigers kick anywhere but between the posts.
I don't know if it was high wind game, was it? I mean, last season we had 4 ridiculously high wind games at home, didn't we? With that famous example of Elliot Daly kicking out a hand and the ball landing behind him.
Oh. Yeah.
I got if it's starting in September now, Charlie Bracken had better learn to box kick in the wind, because it looks like it's going to be every game.
Well, yeah, it could well be, couldn't it? Well, he'll either sink or swim on that one, won't he? I think he's got the talent to work it out. So, and if I see him on Thursday, I'll have a quick word with him as well. Right, shall we have a break there, and then we'll come back and finish up talking about women's rugby and everything that's going on in that world.
You're listening to the Fezcast.
Well, welcome back to our last part of our Fezcast for this week. With me, Jez, Duncan, Alex and John, and we got women's rugby to discuss. And first of all, Alex, we'll come over to you. You didn't send your grandparents up to Manchester or to Sale this weekend. You know, I mean, last time we thought you did well there, but I mean, obviously, you know, it's a little bit far for them to travel maybe, but the women have gone away to Sale and got another fine win on the road in the competition. 100% start. Can't ask for much more than that, can we?
No, we've got a secured place in the Cup semi-final as well with that, and game to go, so that's good. I think it's a strong start. Sale started really well to the Cup. They've not necessarily got as many players away with internationals and kind of have more of a first choice team. But I think the team we've got is really strong, and it'll be even stronger when the internationals then come back as well.
I want to pull out one player in particular at the moment. You know, we spoke about at the end of last season, John, in saying that we felt she did brilliantly well while she was still had a chance of hitting that England World Cup squad in Poppy Cleal. Obviously disappointed that she didn't, but she seems to be coming back and it hasn't affected her, which we wondered whether it would do following the World Cup. If she's coming out, she's putting in big performances week after week at the moment.
Sadly, from a Saracens perspective, great from an England perspective, I think she's going to be back in the national side at some point. She's taken it as a driver for her, because it would have been very easy to think, oh, I can just turn the hand a little bit around this now, but she certainly hasn't done that.
No.
I mean, her performances so far this season have been outstanding.
That's the thing, isn't it, Duncan? She can only do what she can do, and if she has got ideas about getting back into that England squad, regardless of what competition it is for the Six Nations or whatever, then she's going the right way about it.
She is. I mean, I think she should have been in the England squad, but not easy to get in there, is it? There's a wealth of talent. Amelia McDougall seems to have carried on being dead-eye Dick as well. I think it's going to be quite a tough management problem when our absent manager comes back and all the Canadians and English girls come back. There's going to be a lot of women playing in the team at the moment thinking, I deserve my place. Going to be a lot of disgruntled players, naturally disgruntled players, because everybody wants to be in the team. And that court is not going to fit into a pint pot at the moment.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it is a headache to have. I mean, it's a headache that is often said, Alex, is a one that you want. You'd rather have too many players and having to keep players happy when perhaps they're not, then not having enough players and not having enough quality. But another player I wanted to mention is at 9, Ella, another player who obviously must have been disappointed not to got into the England squad for the Rugby World Cup. But again, she hasn't let it affect her, has she?
She's in the position with getting back in the England squad. Is Mohan's probably going to retire after this World Cup, at least internationally. So she's got a good chance of getting in them for the Six Nations. But I think she just kind of made it her focus and gone, you didn't select me for the World Cup. I'm going to prove you wrong and show you that I can do what you want me to do. And it just seems to be driving her to do more and more.
It's been a great start. As I say, we've qualified for the knockouts already. It could be a really good start for Saracens women to the season, couldn't it? If they play like they are, I mean, I would say potentially favourites for this tournament as it stands.
Definitely. It's interesting with the entirety of the PW Cup being at the start that some of the young players aren't necessarily going to have that opportunity to play so much as we go on through the season. But actually, you look at people like Ella, like Emma Hardy, like Cindy Gregerson, then they're going to be in our first choice squad regardless of the competition we're playing in. So actually, it's a really good building block, whereas other teams don't necessarily have that and are going to have struggles trying to integrate their international players into a team that's less experienced and younger.
The other question I want to just ask you on that before we move on to the Women's World Cup, Alex, is, we've mentioned Ella, we've mentioned Poppy, we've mentioned other players who you would expect to be in that first team squad. Is there any younger players, though, that have come through now that you're looking at thinking, do you know what, they stand a chance of knocking a few people out, more established stars ahead of them? Is there somebody who's going to be tapping on Marley Packer's shoulder, for instance, or on Kelsey Clifford's shoulder and saying, I've stood up here, you've got to work hard to get back in this team?
I think Charlotte Wright-Hayes had a really good start, scoring, I think she scored like 3 tries in the past 3 games, and she's come back from a long-term injury. So I don't think she's putting her hand up to start in the back row. And we've got probably 6 international back rowers who are playing at a World Cup who are going to come back and be vying for a place. I think it's going to be really hard to kind of fit them on the team, make sure they get the game time that they need, whilst also keeping that consistency.
And we've made some signings as well, haven't we? There's been a couple of new players turning up, and I'm relying on you, Alex, to know who they are.
I know there's 2 Canadians who are both forwards, Letitia Royer and then Julia. I have no idea how to pronounce her surname.
I wouldn't try.
And I don't know how to pronounce it, but they're both in the Canadian squad. So it'll be really interesting to see how they come back and integrate with our current back rowers.
Could be as dangerous as the American women's coach surname, couldn't it? Who all the commentators were trying to avoid saying.
Yeah.
It's a curse. I watched the Tour of Britain the other week when they came through Oxfordshire, finished just north of us in Burton Dasset, and all the villages they were coming through, and nobody. Well, he's bawdy. You just couldn't pronounce them. It's hilarious, really. But there we go. Shall we move on though to the Rugby World Cup? And I mean, it was the knockout stage. It's the big games now. I mean, fair dues. We've had the group stages. The group stages were excellent. They're worse. Big results either way, but knockout games. Let's start with Saturday's games. Canada, they look bloody good, don't they, John? I think they've really stepped up. And, good news for Saracens, Sophie de Goody, a one-woman cheat code in rugby, isn't she? So there's nothing that girl can't do. And, she's leading them. Canada are looking really, really good, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And it's good to see that we're signing, as Alex said, we brought in a couple of their players. They're going to give anybody a game at the moment.
You can see how much we missed Sophie de Goody last season. I see her knees really strapped up, so I hope it lasts the rest of the season because she's phenomenal.
Fair dues. I mean, she had a pretty dodgy knee problem, but she's still kicking. So guessing that is not that bad. But they're up against New Zealand, who I think are slightly flattered to deceive this tournament. But what you know about New Zealand is they are the queens of knockout rugby when it comes to women's rugby, aren't they, Duncan?
Yeah, they are. I mean, you could say with the Canada game, the New Zealand game, and the England game, they sort of went how these games against the top teams have gone, where the other team puts up quite a fight for 20 minutes and then the big team powers away. I'm really glad that we're not facing either New Zealand or Canada in the semis.
The only thing I will say about that, though, Alex, and I'm sure you'd agree with me, whoever wins out of Canada and New Zealand is going into that final. They're going to be going in battle hardened, aren't they? They will have been tested at the highest level, and whoever wins that is going to go in there, provided they haven't had too many injuries, provided they haven't had any suspensions or sendings offs or anything like that, because full throttle games like New Zealand, Canada is going to be, does have that potential. But whichever team comes through that, they are going to be absolutely blooded and ready to go, aren't they?
Yeah, and either New Zealand are going to go into the final going, we're world champions, we've won this 6 times, or 5 times, however it was, before, we can do this, we've beaten England in the past, or Canada are going to go in going, we've beaten the world champions, we drew with them earlier in the year and beat them last year as well, and go, we can beat England. So I think it'll be really hard, and kind of England have that target on their backs of being number one in the world, being favourites. Actually, whatever team comes in, it's just going to want to have that drive to beat England.
Now, first game on Sunday, John, was Ireland against France. And the first thing to say about it is Ian Tempest obviously was going around getting a coffee at some point when he should be looking at his screens and picking up something that everybody else in the world picked up, which was the French player mistaking a wafer for a baguette and trying to take a lump out of her arm. I mean, I was glad to see Maggie Alfonsi when she was interviewed. She said it was disgusting. And actually, right, where Ruby Tui had tried to make a little bit of tried to play it down a little bit, Maggie turned around and said exactly as it was. It was disgusting. No need for her on the rugby field, and hopefully she'll get a long ban for it, won't she, John?
I was questioning, as many others were, the referee at that game, and thought, is she going to get any card out at some point? But that sort of behaviour is unacceptable, and it's not required. I mean, in the old days, it would have been dealt with on the field, but we have if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, the TMO Tempest would have spotted that. He'd have spotted someone coming in and giving it the old Fred Astaire on the back and everything. And,
exactly.
Whatever. Yeah. But he didn't spot the bite. I mean, what does Ian Tempest do? I really don't know.
He calls out ones that aren't required to be called out, and he misses ones that really do need calling out. Well, that sort of behaviour is unacceptable, and you don't like to see anybody banned. But in that case, that should be, she should get hammered for that.
I felt Ireland were fairly unlucky. I'm not going to say they were robbed, but there was so much that didn't go against them. Now, they had opportunities first half to win behind them. I thought they played extremely well, but a bit like Saracens against Tigers, I suppose, on the weekend. They never took the opportunities that they had. But one maul that went from the 22, a line out on the 22, to within 2 metres of the line, and French girls were falling on the floor, dragging it down. How that wasn't a penalty try, I will never know, Duncan, because that was as clear a penalty try as I think you could possibly do. Because if the French girls had stayed on their feet, legally, they would have scored that try without a shadow of a doubt.
That's right. I mean, you could say Ireland didn't take their chances. You could also say that France defended incredibly well. But in that instance, you're totally right. I mean, how can it be that you have a maul that's going forward at the speed that maul was going forward? It was clearly brought down. A woman is carded for it. It was going to be a try. There was no two ways about it. It's one of the clearest penalty tries you've ever seen. And I felt in the first half, Ireland needed to get to 20 points. And you could say I didn't see the second half. I only saw the first half, but that was the key point of play. And if Ireland had scored that or been given that penalty try, the points difference would have been in their favour.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought there was, you talk about France defending well, and yes, they did, because they played the referee fantastically well, Alex. But I felt they got away with literally blue murder at the breakdown. They were entering from the sides. They were killing the ball. They were going way past the ball on occasion, which is my bête noire in rugby, is the players that go past the ball with no intention of making a proper clear out, just obliterating defence in front of them. And so, they got away with everything there. And, I think Ireland can feel pretty aggrieved, can't they, Alex?
They didn't do too well at the scrum. I think the last line out, they knocked the ball on. Could you have said they were going to deliberately? Like, they didn't give it because it was in the line out. And, you could have just said you're reaching for the ball. But ultimately, if Ireland had got that ball and the French hadn't knocked it on, they could have scored, they could have won the game. So I think it's interesting to see, those colours decisions go. But I think France will get exposed by that with England. If they make mistakes, England will capitalise, whereas Ireland maybe didn't do that. And I think that will expose them.
You just got to hope that countries like Ireland and Fiji and South Africa also come to mind, that they continue to get the backing, because there's a few teams there that, if they carry on getting the backing, continue improving, the next World Cup we're going to have a fantastic set of semi-finals. It's going to be the potential to be a brilliant set of quarterfinals in the next World Cup as well.
I think that's a very good point, Duncan. And John, I mean, we'll talk about Ireland and then we'll talk about Scotland in a moment. I think at the start of the tournament, if you'd offered Ireland and Scotland quarterfinals and to gone into those games and been competitive in those games against two of the best teams in the world, they would have said, yeah, thank you very much, we'll take that. But I also think now that, in particular Ireland, but possibly Scotland as well, will be sat there saying, we could have got more out of this tournament. And there'll be an element of disappointment, which can only be good to drive those players on for future. And both Ireland and Scotland got young squads. And the Irish prop, I'm not going to even try to pronounce her name, but she was fabulous, I thought, on the weekend. And then, they got a lot of young players in both of those squads who will have learned from this, who will have got hunger, and they've got to be invested in now because they've deserved to get that investment.
Scotland in particular, I mean, it looks like their coach is leaving, and there are many of their players, I believe, that still don't have contracts, but they gave 150% for that shirt that they were wearing. And as you say, there are some really good young players, and I mean, they haven't qualified for the World Cup every time, but they couldn't have given any more, given the situation that they're in. So they must be ecstatic about where they got to. And I think despite playing against England, who were outstanding in so many different areas, and the weather, which was appalling, I think they gave a really good show of themselves.
And we'll move on to that game now and say, I mean, the first thing is I'm going to have a whinge about the referee and Duncan again in that game, because I cannot believe that you get 8 scrum penalties against you. And for all of the score, 40 points away was at the end. In reality, the gulf was a lot greater, and at scrum time in particular, I could understand why they wouldn't want a yellow card a player, because it would make it embarrassing. But at the end of the day, it's also slightly disrespectful to Scotland that they weren't yellow carded, because you're almost saying, oh, we're going to try and keep you in the game a little bit. I think they would rather turn around and say, look, if we're being penalised, referee us properly, and a yellow card should have come out. And I remember Zoe Allcroft at one point come back, who had a really good game as well, because she's just back from injury, going out to the referee and said, how many is it now? The old Owen Farrell conversation, isn't it?
Yeah.
There you go, contractual mention of Owen. But yeah, I mean, it's incredulous that they kept players on the field when in reality, I mean, they were absolutely destroyed at scrum time.
I wonder if there were any instructions to the ref to say, if England are powering ahead, be a little bit lenient, because you're absolutely right. And if there were no such instructions, I suspect that referee has probably blotted her copybook in terms of chances of getting a semi-final, let alone a final. But you mentioned that whoever gets to the final out of New Zealand and Canada will have had proper battle hardening. As I said at the time, I was quite glad she didn't send anybody to the bin, because England didn't need it, and I'd rather have seen them continue to have to play 15 players.
Now let's talk about a couple of Saracens players, Alex, who I felt were exemplary in the pack. Kelsey at prop, 2 tries, fantastic. Probably should have got a hat-trick, I think. I mean, she was there sniffing it around. She had a great game, but player I thought who had an absolutely amazing game and completely and utterly ripped apart the Scottish second row, line-out, was Rosie Gallagher. I mean, she was just, I mean, she sorted out what their calls were. And she went up and she disrupted everything that Scotland did, to the extent that they started then throwing in trick lineouts because it's all they had left, wasn't it, Alex?
She didn't necessarily get the credits that she almost deserves because she doesn't score the tries. She doesn't necessarily do anything flashy, but she did kind of what England needed to kind of disrupt Scotland line out and then get possession back so that we could go on and score the tries. And I think kind of that's what we needed, and she stepped in kind of into the position that Abby Ward filled previously and is saying, no, I want that starting shirt, I deserve it, and you should put me into starting locks, which she doesn't necessarily always had.
She is one of those players, and she perhaps, if you look at the other second rows around the squad and around the league, she's not going to be the biggest, bulkiest player. She's quite live. She's quite, she's very athletic, but she does play a stone and a half, 2 stone above her weight. I think there was a couple of occasions, John, where she took the ball on and you sat there thinking, she's going to get whacked here by one of these Scottish forwards. And she took them on and she dominated the collision. And that's all you can want from a second row, isn't it?
We can't really ask any more from her than that. I mean, they tried everything to stop her, but as Alex has said, she was just outstanding.
Yeah.
She was completely outstanding, and she's been outstanding so many times for Saracens, and she is a brilliant, brilliant player, which in some ways I find quite puzzling, because when you look at her, as you say, she's not the biggest player, she's also not the most mobile. She's not the quickest around the pitch, but despite that, she manages to be absolutely brilliant.
She's got a diesel engine. I mean, that's the thing. In second rows, you don't necessarily need to have a V12 Ferrari engine. You want Ford John Deere diesel tractor engine, and one that will chug all game. And her level of intensity was the same minute 1 as it was minute 83. When the ball had got into the red, she just gives you consistent high intensity performance, and that's all you could hope for from a second row, isn't it?
Especially if she's partnering, say, Abby Ward and locks, she's going to be the one that stays on for the whole 80 minutes. And that consistency is kind of what earns her place in the squad, is that she can keep doing that week in, week out. And kind of John Mitchell doesn't have to worry about it because she's going to put the same performance out every week.
It's the old Richard Hill kind of performance, isn't it? You don't notice what they do, but you notice it when they're not there. That's the difference, isn't it? When they're on the field, they're doing things nefarious in the darkness of whatever going on in that engine room. And Rosie has really shown her worth to England. I think, you're right. That France semi-final, she should be one of the first names on the team sheet.
Definitely. And you mentioned Kelsey Clifford. I mean, she came in for Hannah Bottoman, who was, putting her hand up for potentially best player in the world at the time, and absolutely no worries. She's young, Kelsey Clifford as well, and she's looks to the manner born.
Over 100 appearances, and she's still only 24, isn't it? I mean, that is ridiculous. I mean, she is a quality player. Well, we're looking forward to next week. I mean, France, I think they've got to up their intensity, otherwise they could easily get blown away. They haven't really had to perform at their best levels to get anywhere in this tournament, and it's shown. But I don't care as long as we send big girl after big girl over that scrum half, because I can't stand her. But then again, I've got a thing against scrum halves, full stop anyway. I'm not a particularly big fan of scrum halves anyway, but there you go.
A big debate as to whether it should be Zoe Harrison or Holly Aitchison. I mean, we're sort of biased one way, but difficult call, that one.
Right, Holly had a great game, didn't she, on the weekend?
In difficult conditions as well.
Yeah, I mean, she ran the game in so many ways, but I do also think that Zoe can do that as well. And, the beauty of these players are that they can play with Helena Rowlands as well, who had a brilliant game at 10 the week before, and she's down slotted in at fullback because Ellie Gildun's out. And, you don't miss those star players. Of course, you want them back in and, your first choice is there. But when a player gets injured, John Mitchell's got a team of players who can fit in and work to his processes and do really well, haven't he, John?
That's the point that he was making the other day. He's got a kind of a big pot of treasures at the moment. And it's a nice position for him to be in, to say, well, I've got that person I could bring back next week. I've got another person here. In fact, I've got 2 or 3 people in the same positions. And so it's a kind of, it's a nice position to be in for him.
It's a brilliant option for him to have, to be able to bring on Zoe Harrison in the second half, shuffle up the pack. Holly Aitchison goes to 12, and suddenly the other team's got to face something completely different to what they've been facing up until then.
Indeed, if you're chasing a game, you've got that option. You know, the biggest criticism I ever have of coaches is their adherence to plan A. And if plan A doesn't work, we just go to plan A.1. John's got a team there that he can implement plan B, plan C, and plan D if he needs to. And so far, he hasn't had to, but he has given it a go when games have been won to see how it would go. And, you know, that all bodes well going forward. So, anyway, plenty to look forward to. As I say, hopefully next week we'll have a big interview. I think Matt's in the hot seat next week because I'm away on holiday in the 17th century, or as it's better known, Norfolk. So I won't have internet access or anything like that. But hopefully, as I say, I'm going down to StoneX on Thursday and we'll have something special from there, I hope. Fingers crossed. Ollie, if you're listening to this and you haven't sorted it yet, please do. But other than that, thank you for your time, Duncan, Alex and John, and thank you everybody for listening in. I just want to have a quick mention just to say in 4.5 weeks' time, I'm running the Yorkshire Marathon. So if anybody wants to sponsor me, phone me a £5. MattJustGiving.com fundraising/Jezza-Denton, and you'll get entries into sweepstakes and all sorts of things, but that's for motor neuron disease, so we'll put links up to that. But until then, I'll say all the best, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time, no doubt, when we might even see the return of Sam, because he said he could do the last one of the month, which would be a surprise if he does. I mean, I'll put a £5 on that as well. I'll see if that happens.
Actually, it was great fun listening to John last week, didn't it? I really enjoyed what he had to say about the game in South Africa.
Yeah, he wasn't he? He's great, and hopefully we can hear more from John this season. But Alex, John, Duncan, thank you very much for your time tonight. I'm recording this for Wednesday morning, and thank you everybody for listening in. And we'll see you next week on the Fezcast.
Thanks, guys.
This is the Fezcast.